Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss Boris Johnson's start to the so-called tour of Scotland and wonder if it is a result of what Ian Blackford of the SNP called a panic about growing support for Scottish independence. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, yeah, Boris Johnson's gone to Scotland. He's there now. Oh, dear. Now, when I first heard that he was going to do a tour of Scotland, my first thought was, what, you mean he's going to Glasgow and Edinburgh? Turns out not even that. I gather Glasgow is not on his schedule. Now, my next thought was that surely announcing a tour of Scotland is self-defeating, because if we assume that the purpose is to drum up support for the Union, which is the stated purpose, that he publicly talks up anyway, but is actually tearing down with his actions, it puts me in mind of his government's tour of the north of England, sort of my country, which they called North England. You know, just to remind us that they don't actually get any part of the UK outside of their little bubble around London and the southeast. Ian Blackford said that Boris Johnson just didn't get Scotland. I wouldn't feel so aggrieved. He doesn't get most of the UK. I mean, he doesn't ever announce a tour of the southeast of England, for example. He just goes to various bits of it for his photo opportunities. But if he ventures out to other parts of the country, well, then it's a tour. As if it's a great chore to just go on a government visit to, say, Manchester or Newcastle or Edinburgh or Newport. Heaven forbid he should actually go to Northern Ireland to represent the government. So although I think he should be visiting Scotland, of course he should, as well as all parts of the UK, you don't announce it as a tour. That tells me that he's going to do this thing, tick a box, and then never intend going back again. Then I turned my mind back to when he visited last year to be hosted by Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, for talks. Now, when Johnson has been out and about in the south of England, for example, you often see the press recording a member of the public taking him to task about just how crap he is. This happens all the time. Whenever he goes out, someone has a pop at him that just happens to be there. Now, when he went to Scotland last year, it seemed to me that people actually went out of their way to go and boo him. So I was interested in what the reaction would be this time, but I'll have to wait for that. I can hardly imagine that the mood of the majority of those same Scots would have warmed to him since. That being said, we do have to remember that a quarter of Scottish voters voted Conservatives at the recent general election. Because I know a lot is made of first past the post inflating the Conservatives' power. But in Scotland, they actually suffer from it. So we can't, it's easy to fall into the mindset of, you know, Scotland really doesn't like the Conservatives is a thing for England and Wales. They're not a thing in Scotland. No, they are. They're very popular in Scotland. They got 25% of the vote. But that only translated into 10% of the seats in Scotland. Now, the SNP were by far the most effective there because they won 45% of the vote, but they got 81% of the seats. That is a Tory strategist's wet dream. So what I'm saying is that I accept the SNP position that Scotland has not voted in these Conservatives into, like, political power. But they are still at the mercy of their policies, and that is fundamentally unfair. However, a lot of Scots did vote for the Conservatives. Don't imagine that they've just got little satellite pockets of support in Scotland. They have a lot of support. So we can't say that the Conservatives are unpopular in Scotland as such. However, I might categorise it as follows. So, 1 in 4 people in Scotland that voted Conservative. So the other 3 in 4 obviously voted some other bugger. A very, very small number even voted Brexit Party, but that was a very small number. Now, the way I would think about it is this. So if you look at all the people, the 45% that voted SNP, so let's say there was no SNP. Quite a lot of those would have voted for Labour or for the Liberal Democrats or for the Green Party. I can't imagine very many of them would have voted Conservative. Similarly, for the people who voted Labour, it was 18%. You know, they if there was no Labour Party there, again, I think some of those would have voted SNP or Green Party or Liberal Democrats. Not really so much Conservative. So what I'm probably trying to say is, although a lot of people think the Conservatives are the party to go for, of the rest, not many of them would even consider them second or third choice, is what I'm basically saying. So of the rest of them, quite a lot of them actively hate them. And I noticed James O'Brien wondering how many of the newly enlarged number of Scots favouring independence were motivated purely by Brexit and Boris Johnson. Now, what I generally wonder, as I noted in a recent video, I want to sort of cover again here, is if the best way to strengthen the union wouldn't simply be to analyse the problem as this. So the people of Scotland do not want imposed upon them a change in the way they have to do things if they specifically voted against that way of doing things. The same would apply everywhere, of course, all through the UK, not just Scotland. But we're talking about Scotland here. Now, that seems to me to be key for many people. Now, yes, there are a lot of Scottish people that want independence for the same reason that a lot of people wanted Brexit. It has nothing to do with particular politics. It's just a belief centred on their perception of self. Fine. But those people are not in a majority. So what is it that puts them into a majority position? So the solution for me is simple. Do not allow there to be any change in the way people have to do things if a majority of them have expressly voted against it. That means, in practical terms, that any law that is to be introduced that would affect the whole of the UK must be ratified by the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament and the Northern Irish Assembly after passing through Westminster. So the way I would see a fully functioning devolved union would also include representation in England, probably several parliaments in England for the different bits of it. But as things stand with the current legislative bodies, for it to be fully functioning and fully devolved, that seems obvious to me. Because what that would create is a situation, so Westminster can absolutely pass a law. Now, if it only affects England at the moment, because there's no English Parliament, then it just goes through no problem. But if it would also affect Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, then it has to go through their bodies as well. If it would just affect, say, England and Wales, then it would have to also go through the Welsh Parliament. What this would do is it would preserve the status quo unless every single legislative body that governs an area that would be affected is fully in favour of it, or a majority in favour of it. That seems an obvious response to me. I mean, that's how the EU works. That's what I keep saying. That's a modern union that actually works. Someone was pointing out on Twitter today that, the difference in unions between the United Kingdom and the European Union is that the member states of the European Union are treated as equals, and whereas in the UK they're not. Now, that's particularly true of the current UK government. I wouldn't say that's categorically true of the UK in general. But the system is not in place to protect other parts of the UK from a government that doesn't wish to treat other parts of the union as equal, certainly. Seems an obvious response to me, that. But of course the Conservatives would never go for it because that stops them doing whatever they please, and it means that they can't treat those outside of their elite bubbles like plebs, serfs. Which is why the situation is looking so bleak. Johnson is tootling about in Scotland to emphasise the strength of the union. You'd be mad to want to leave, he's saying. And what is his main pitch to this effect? Now, he's saying that the coronavirus pandemic has emphasised the strength of the union. Oh my God, it's worse than I thought. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think it was last week, wasn't it, said that Scotland would have gone bankrupt if they had to deal with it alone. So patronising lies then, that's what's going to preserve the union. Excellent, nice one. But what of Boris Johnson himself? He seriously wants to bring up the coronavirus pandemic as a key strength of the union. So let's look at the situation. In the last week, England had over 400 COVID deaths. Down considerably on when that used to be a daily total. But about 450 deaths in the last week. Scotland had one. And don't give me any crap about different sized populations. England has a population 11 times that of Scotland, not 450 times. If I wanted to emphasise the strength of the union, and I absolutely do. I would avoid talking about the coronavirus like the plague, if you will pardon the expression, not charge headlong into that topic. Finally, it is worth pointing out here a possible ulterior motive. I don't think it's a likely one, but it is possible. You've got to bring it in for Boris Johnson, because Conservatives are a funny bunch when it comes to the union, and massive contradictions, because the party is called the Conservative and Unionist Party. Most members and even supporters seem to genuinely want to protect the union, and isn't just in a Little Englander sort of way, though it inevitably is for some. Remember, 25% of Scottish voters actually voted Conservative last December. There may have even been more that would have done so, but couldn't bring themselves to vote for the party promising a hard Brexit, or to have a bullying clown like Boris Johnson running the ship of state. So, I mean, in England, for example, the Conservatives did quite well out of the fact that they bashed Corbyn a lot. It was quite an easy thing to do. So they had a lot of people voting Conservative because the alternative was seen as Corbyn. In Scotland, they've got a rather different alternative. So there's definitely support for the party in Scotland. No point denying that. No point. However, that being said, if Scotland did break away, it would be politically advantageous to the Conservatives. Because, like I say, first past the post suits them in England. In Wales, the last election gave them a reasonable share, 36% of the votes and 35% of the seats. So, you know, about the same as they would have got under proportional representation. But Scotland cost them badly. Their votes are too spread out to win them a decent number of seats. It's a net loss to their power. So there are electoral benefits in Scotland becoming independent for them. So I don't rule out the possibility that people at the top of the Conservatives, including Johnson himself, would like to say that they're protecting the union, you know, for the supporters, but just act boorishly towards Scotland to push their buttons and make independence more likely. But do I think that's the case? Maybe, but then there's the timing of these visits. So they weren't announced very far in advance. Usually something like this is announced a fair amount in advance, which seemed odd for a tour. It was announced just days before. It wasn't very long ago. It was just literally a few days ago. And not long after polling has shown clearly increasing number in favour of independence. So the actions would certainly fit with Ian Blackford's characterisation of them as a panic reaction. So it could well be just as simple as Boris Johnson genuinely does wish to preserve the union, but because he doesn't really believe in it, he has no idea how. He just can't understand why the plebs are not delighted to be associated with him, and he thinks that his after-dinner speaker's charm will win the peasants over. Either way, if I'm honest, I'm not hopeful that the next poll will show a reversal of the current trend based on his efforts. But those are my thoughts right now. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.